coming here today to this talk with Dr. Guild with the one and only Munroe Bergdorf, the international social activist, model and DJ. We hope you're excited to welcome Munroe here today. It's a pleasure to have her here. And for this Q&A session, we'll start off with an interview, and then we'll open up to questions from the floor. And we hope you will join us in giving Munroe a very, very warm welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Munroe, for joining us. To start off with, it must have been a very intense few months in the global spotlight, all the media attention, etc.
Yeah.
What are the main lessons you've learned from the past few months?
I don't think that there's one. I think in the first few weeks, I was like, oh God, maybe I'm going about this wrong. There's a lot of second guessing myself. There was a lot of panic, confusion. I kind of felt every single emotion that I think I'm capable of feeling. But I think ultimately it's made me a lot more sure of myself. I think that it showed me the power of standing true to yourself, standing firm and proud in your truth as well. But also, not second guessing yourself so much. Drawing strength from my community, realising that I can't do it alone, even feeling the energy in this room is really nice, and I feel really at home with you guys already. I just met you. So I think just, the fact that there's so many of you in this room, showing that people actually do want to educate themselves, open up, even if you don't understand, realising that we don't all have the answers. So there's not just one. I feel actually it's been a really bad situation. I wouldn't ever call it a blessing in disguise. It really wasn't a blessing. It was institutionalised racism. So, so there's that. But the way that it forced me to step up and stand true in myself and really come out here and meet people like you and go out into the media and kind of just, speak truth to power. That's really what I'm glad happened.
Speaking about it not having been a blessing in disguise, how exactly do you even go about dealing with the abuse online? Like, how do you even begin to deal with that day to day?
It was difficult in the beginning. I felt really, really down. I didn't really understand how to tap into the community to support me. The community rallied around me, and if it wasn't for queer people, it wasn't for women of colour and white allies really rallying around me and saying, you did a really great thing by standing up for yourself and by not backing down and just being confident in what you were saying. I think that it's turned into a really great case study so that this kind of thing wouldn't happen again. But it forced me to also look at what I let into my life and even what notifications I've got on my phone, what apps I've got on my phone. I realised that Facebook turned into a huge trigger for me, and it used to be I used to really utilise it in my activism, and then it just turned into something that was really just a source of panic. So I can't even look at my friend's phone. The black and blue just sends me into a tears. So I just needed to take it off my phone so that I could just focus my energy into constructive things, just change the medium, find out what works for you. I don't feel like there's one form of activism that's more important or more effective than the other. I think it's a highly individual thing. Activism can be as big or small as you can manage, or as big or small as you want it to be. It can be calling out something in a domestic sense, or calling out something on a global sense. It really is whatever your circumstances allow. So I don't feel like anyone should be pressured. I think that there's a huge pressure on LGBT people and black people, people of colour, to be activists, to always have the answers, to educate white people, to educate cis people, to educate heterosexual people. And really, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to do anything. It's not on the oppressed to educate the people that benefit from oppression. It really is down. It it is down to what you can handle, and unfortunately with situations like what I went through, I didn't have a choice in the fact, and that's what we need to start stamping out with what happened to Lola Olufemi in Cambridge when she simply asked for diversity, and it turned into a backlash of saying that she wanted to get all of the white men authors out, which isn't what she said at all. So we really need to look at how the media operates and how there's a constant pushback on especially femmes and female identifying people within the media.
And what was the spark that made you want to speak out publicly initially? Was it specifically the neo-Nazi march in the US? Or
no, I mean, the thing is that I've never not been this person. There's always been a sense of me that's been very frustrated with how the world operates and my place in the world and how I feel like I'm always up against it. And I didn't know how many other people felt that way. And it just takes someone to break out of that echo chamber and to say, hey, actually, I'm going to use this platform to say enough is enough. And it just so happened that, I don't know what it was, whether it was social media algorithms or whatnot, but it just went nuts. And when something goes viral, it can really go either way, and I think it went both ways. So, yeah, I didn't know how it was going to blow up, but I'm glad that it did. And that post in itself was a reaction to Charlottesville, and I wrote it a month before it blew up. So, but the reason why it blew up is because it was sold to the right-wing press by someone who I actually knew, which was a really bad feeling, but also was an example of trans misogyny because this person had never liked me and didn't like black women or trans women. So it was, yeah, there were so many aspects of it, which also was an example of what I was highlighting in the post in the first place. So, I don't know, I hope that it's used as a case study and education bodies refer to it. I have seen on Insta stories that a lot of people in university or college have been talking about it as an example of how the media operates, how there's a definite divide between the left-wing press and the right-wing press, and do we even have impartial media in this country, or is it all just algorithms and bias? Who knows, but the more that we talk about it and the more that we really break it down, hopefully we can actually get somewhere.
Let's take it back a bit to whatever amount of detail you want to go to. What was your experience just growing up as a biracial young person questioning their gender identity?
Well, I grew up in a very, very white majority, was very, very white, to the point where I was the only person of colour in my high school for the large majority of my educational experience. And my experience of racism was largely microaggressions. It was people not really saying something, but saying a lot within not saying something, and constantly being overlooked, or people constantly, when we were talking about slavery or when it was Black History Month, everyone in the class would just turn to look to me like I had all the answers, and I didn't know anything else either, So, I mean, my experience of learning about racism was experience racism. So it was a really frustrating time in my life, and I hope that it's changed. When I go back to see my parents, I see lots more LGBT faces, people really expressing themselves when it comes to gender, people not being afraid to hold their hands in the street. So I have faith that it's changing, but for me personally at that time it was a very confusing and exclusive time. But I think it's also gone into who I am today and why I have such a drive to change things.
Sure, and then you spoke about the divide in the media between right-wing and left-wing media and whether it's truly objective. What do you feel is the biggest kind of misconception people have about you and also about your message?
I don't really tend to think too much about what people think of me, because I don't think that you need to like me. I don't feel like you need to like me to respect what I talk about. You don't need to like a black person to respect that they deserve human rights. So it's not really in my interest, really, to think too much about what people think, because it just damages my psyche, and it's not good for my self-care. So instead of focusing on what people don't like about me, I focus on what I like about myself. And I like that I'm tenacious, I like that I can be articulate with what I feel, I like that I listen to others, I like that I am active in wanting to be the change that I want to see in the world. This is a much more constructive way of looking at the situation that I'm in, rather than focusing on what people don't like about me, because I really don't care. I don't.
Let's get to the topic itself, which is, large part of why we're here. Which is the question I always had when the whole thing blew up, and it's a question that comes up whenever I'm trying to educate people anyway. Why is it that people are more offended being offended about being called racist than they are about racism?
I think because people don't understand what racism is. White people don't understand. Majority of white people don't understand what racism is in a modern day context. I feel that the definition of racism that people feel that we should go by is the dictionary definition. Slurring my words. Dictionary definition, which of course wasn't written by a person of colour, probably not, and was essentially used to control people of colour. It said that, as Donald Trump said, it goes both ways, and it doesn't go both ways, it punches down. So we really need to be speaking about all aspects of racism, from microaggressions to out and out violent crime, hate crimes. We've got institutionalized racism. Systemic racism is just simple exclusion, overlooking, denying access to healthcare, to housing, to discrimination in dating apps. There's so many different levels. And the more that we really have all of these individual conversations and not just try to whitewash the whole thing as calling someone the N-word or the P-word, or, it's not that simple. It's never been that simple. But in simplifying it, it denies a lot of what actually happens. So it's just basically, it's controlling the narrative. So in dismantling racism and realising and making people realise what it actually is, then we can actually get somewhere.
So you're someone who likes to use your platform to talk about issues that you care about. Do you feel that other people in the fashion industry, other figures, even brands, could do more?
I would never say to any individual person that they could do more, because you never know what that person's going through in their personal life. You never know what they stand to gain or what they stand to lose. I feel like in an ideal world, everybody should be using their platform, but I know that it's a very individual thing, and I had this thrown upon me, and I was to an extent being active in activism anyway, so it just so happened that I was able to take it on, but I would never expect that of somebody. I think it's fantastic when somebody does, though, and I really applaud everybody going through that. But for brands, yes, brands should definitely be doing more, especially if you're going to be focusing your activism around race and around gender, around sexuality. You need to follow through with that. You can't just pay lip service or put people in front of a camera and say that's it. You need to be employing consultants to make sure that the product is worthy of consumption of the same people that you are advertising the product to. You need to make sure that they are donating money to organisations or charity, or even time, or at least something, to give back to the communities that they're pushing product to, because they can't just make money out of us. They need to be giving back. Even literature, education. There's so much that brands can do. There's so much that they have. There's so much resources that they have access to that they can channel into communities. So I don't think it's enough that brands just make money out of us. I really feel that they've got a responsibility to give back to the people that they're making money out of. We see it time after. Brands do it silently as well. So they don't need they don't even need to be making a big thing out of it. It doesn't need to be a big, this is what we're doing to give back to communities. Just give back, even just with your time. There's so many things that brands can do and that they should do.
How did it feel when you started getting the big breaks in your modeling career, especially as a trans woman of colour, when you were chosen to be a spokesperson for L'Oreal?
It felt great, and I mean, honestly, if I knew what L'Oreal do within the world, not just in the West but in the East, I probably wouldn't have signed with them. But
how exactly? What do you
well, I mean, in the West they're doing diversity campaigns, but in the East they're marketing skin lightening creams to East Asian and South Asian women. They don't do that in the West because they know that they can't get away with it, but in the East they do, and they can. So there's that, and then there's the animal cruelty aspect. I wasn't as aware, and on my side it's made me realise that I need to be a lot more active in understanding what brands I'm involving myself with. But yet again, it's a lesson for myself, and I think there's a lesson for everybody else as well. And it's not necessarily something that you would actively be, that you would go straight to. When a brand comes to you and they essentially say that you're going to be the first trans model to work with a worldwide brand, it's really exciting, and you're like, okay, do I do the visibility, or am I just ignorant to the fact that they're actually not that great of a company ethically? So yeah, it's definitely made me a lot more mindful, and I'm really glad to work with companies like Illamasqua, which are cruelty-free. They're a little bit more pricey, but but at least they're putting their money where their mouth is and really investing in talking about gender, talking about race, talking about sexuality in an educated, progressive way, rather than just redundant, kind of like celebrate yourself.
And then going back to the issue of systemic racism, so what do you feel are the main differences with the UK versus the US in terms of that?
I'm just mindful not to compare racisms. I don't think that is helpful too much, because racism in the UK is very different to racism in South Africa, to Australia, to America, and I think if we compare racisms, then it invalidates people's experiences. You might have a worse time in America to South Africa, or you might have a worse time in South Africa to America, but it doesn't mean that your experience is any less valid. So I tend to just look at them in an intersectional manner and an individual manner.
I noticed when the whole kind of media blow-up was happening after your post became public, that a lot of it was being said as, model Munroe Bergdorf says all white people are racist. Whereas when I read it, it was like, oh, she's clearly saying all white people benefit from racism, which is just a statement of fact. Is there a difference between those two statements?
I mean, if you had seen the whole post and not just the middle bit that was sold to the press, then you would also see what I wrote about if a white person wants to dismantle racism, what they can do. So I think that we need to be looking at the whole thing rather than just what was put in the press. But I mean, I was talking about how all white people do stand to gain from racism, whether or not we like whether we like it or not. None of us are above society. Society is made up of people, and when people just pass it off and say, "Well, it's not me, it's society," it's also it's disregarding the fact that we don't have a choice in being exposed to beauty ideals, being exposed to body ideals, or gender roles, or racial bias. These are all things that have impacted us throughout our whole lives without us even realising. And racism, I mean, we all hold racial bias. Whether or not we can be racist is a different thing. But racial bias and bias with gender, when someone's walking at us towards us in the street, we make we have a whole dialogue of reactions that we don't even have control over, and that is society. But society is all of us. So to make a change, we all individually need to be making changes. So when someone says, "Oh, not me," we need to really just say, "Yes, you."
What are your plans for the future? What are the projects you're most excited for moving forward to next year? What are you hoping to do? Where is Munroe in 5 to 10 years?
5 to 10, oh God. Oh God, I don't know. I'm just looking forward to the next couple of months, to be honest. I feel like we're really doing it on a day-to-day basis. Because every single day is so exciting. Like yesterday I was in Cambridge, don't know if I should say that here, but today I really can't look that far ahead because I feel like if I do that then I'm not being in the moment and not appreciating everything in, minute by minute, hour by hour is my focus. But next month we've got like some magazine covers, which is really fun because we need to maintain that sense of visibility, to maintain the platform, to really get out there and do things like this and keep things fresh, keep things exciting, because it's nice for trans people to see themselves in the media. I mean, that was such a thing that really impacted on me. I didn't have those role models growing up. I didn't have, the Laverne Coxes, Janet Mocks, Isis Kings out there. It was only when I really started to struggle that things started to change, and it was just in time. But I think about the people that were older than me, like how did they cope? Because I just about had those role models. Janet Mock's Redefining Realness book helped me through my transition, and if I didn't have that, then what would I have done? The pictures and the characters out there of trans people, especially trans women of colour, are so damaging. That we only had examples of us in pornography, or not that there's anything wrong with women in sex work, but when that's all that you're presented with, and a lot of the storylines in fiction result in that woman dying, or that woman contracting sexually transmitted diseases and dying, and always being killed, and then in reality you see trans women always being killed, it just doesn't really set you up for seeing yourself in any form of aspirational position. So we need those role models, and we need those aspirational stories, rather than just the doom and gloom that we're presented with every single day.
And then going to the issue of gender, what does gender mean to you?
Gender means to me what it probably doesn't mean to anybody else, and that probably doesn't mean what it means to that other person. Do you know what I mean? I feel like it's a hugely individual thing, and gender identity is just identity. It's just who you see yourself as. I think there's a very big difference between, there is a very big difference between gender and sex, and we can't confuse the two. Gender is on sex is what you're assigned with at birth, and then gender is a sliding scale, and it's wherever you see yourself and however you feel in any given moment. It's not a set thing, and it can be a very beautiful evolution rather than something that you need to subscribe to and feel pressured to subscribe to. I think that I've definitely, as I've become more comfortable with myself and gone, further on with my transition, I felt a lot more. I felt a lot less. I can't speak. A lot less pressure to be hyper-binary. So I can embrace the masculine side of my personality and not be afraid that I'm not going to be believed that I'm trans. It's a really healthy thing to look at ourselves in a really honest way, and so that's how I see gender, just looking at yourself in an honest way and embracing it visually or internally.
You talked about Laverne Cox and Janet Mock and other people you looked up to growing up, but now people are starting to look up to you. How does it feel? How does it feel to be described basically as a role model? Now, you were recently nominated for an award as a role model this year. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's flattering. It's really lovely, and I'm blushing. It's really lovely. I wouldn't ever call myself a role model, but I would never invalidate anybody that wants to call me a role model, if you know what I mean. I would call myself a role option if you want to. If you see yourself in me, then that's fantastic. And yeah. So, I mean, that's fantastic, and I'm really glad that people do. But I would never say that I'm a role model that people should be measuring themselves up against me. We don't need that pressure in society, and I don't need that pressure either. So, yeah, it's a great thing that people are resonating with what I say and seeing themselves in me. That's great.
Perfect. So before we open up to the floor for questions, just as a last question, what advice would you give to the young people in this room here today who want to enter kind of the world of activism or fashion industry or want to make a difference, like you spoke about, seeing the change, being the change they want to see in the world?
Yeah.
What's the best advice you give them?
Well, it looks like you're doing it anyway because you're here and you're open. I mean, I can see your faces and there's life behind your eyes. It's so much nicer than like sitting in newsrooms where people are like, you're not listening, are you? But yeah, I mean, you're in the right place and you're opening your heart and your mind in a institution which is kind of associated with being kind of exclusionary, if we're honest. I think as a person of colour, when I was growing up, when I heard of Oxford and Cambridge, I kind of thought, well, that place isn't for me. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like the fact that you're in this room and you're opening yourself to educating yourself, if you're not a person of colour, if you are cis, if you are straight, then that's a really encouraging thing for me to see and to hear, that people are just opening themselves up to learning and realising that we don't all have the answers. I don't have all the answers either. Like sometimes when I'm asked questions, I'm just like, So it's really great that you are listening, that you are open to learning, and it takes all of us. So, I mean, we are the community. So the more that you go to things like this, the more that you open yourself to new points of view, the more that we can really change things.
Fantastic. Great. Well, we'll open up to the floor now for questions. So please put your hands up.
Who's first?
I really like the point you made about how there's a huge pressure on people of colour or people or minorities to educate white people and be activists. I kind of can definitely relate to that because I was also the only person of colour throughout high school and primary school. And there's this sort of emotional baggage, and I'm always like asked to explain myself and my culture and my religion. But I feel like if I don't explain myself because I'm kind of tired of doing it, then they'll never know. And I have this sort of inner conflict each time. Like, oh, I want to tell them, but at the same time, like, I sometimes find myself falling to like, kind of like dumb it down or change the way I explain it just so it doesn't get rejected. Like, how would do you have any advice for how I can deal with this sort of conflict?
I mean, personally, like it is picking your battles sometimes, and it's listening to the person, because if they really want to learn, if they really want to listen to your life experience, then they won't push you. But if they just want to argue, then it's not worth your energy. So really just listen to how they're being receptive of what you're saying, because you shouldn't have to dumb down your experience for anybody, especially not if it's your profession. Like for me, I have to dumb myself down all the time, because otherwise it's just not going to get through. And ultimately, I'm speaking to people who are listening to, they've got the option of either listening or turning over. So I sometimes do need to dumb it down a little bit, but you don't, and you shouldn't. So just be aware of where the conversation's going, and is it really worth my energy? Because if it's just going to drain you, then there's no point. Yeah, your life experience is valid. Don't let anybody invalidate it.